His son was 9 years old when he called to say he was scared of his own father, not because of anything the father had done, not because of anything the boy had seen, but because someone had spent 6 months telling him, carefully, consistently, with the patience of someone who had planned all of this, that his father was dangerous. The call lasted 40 seconds. Then the line went dead. That was a Tuesday in March. By Friday, a family court judge had signed an emergency motion restricting all contact between Daniel Mercer and his 2 children. No evidence, no hearing, just a declaration filed by his ex-wife stating that Daniel posed an imminent risk to their safety. He hadn't seen his kids in 11 days when he hired the lawyer. He hadn't spoken to them in 19 days when the court appointed a forensic psychologist. What that psychologist found, over 4 months, 84 pages, and interviews with 17 people, would not just give Daniel his children back. It would expose exactly how a covert narcissist dismantles a family, one quiet lie at a time. Stay with me. Daniel Mercer grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee. His friends described him with one word: steady. Not flashy, not loud. Steady. He worked as a civil engineer for a regional infrastructure firm. He coached his son's soccer team on Saturdays. He read to his daughter every night until she was old enough to read herself, and then they read together. He met Claire at a mutual friend's wedding in 2009. She was charming, quick-witted, magnetic, the kind of person who makes everyone in the room feel like the most interesting person she has ever met. They dated for 2 years, married in 2011. His friends noticed small things early. Claire had strong opinions about who Daniel spent time with. She preferred his colleagues to his childhood friends, people who didn't know him before her. She had a gift for finding reasons why certain friendships weren't good for him. His college roommate was immature. His best friend from high school was stuck in the past. One by one, with a logic that always seemed reasonable in the moment, those relationships faded. She had a way of reframing his memories. Stories he remembered as happy, she remembered differently. A vacation that had felt like a breakthrough. She remembered it as the trip where he'd been distracted and distant. A birthday dinner he'd planned carefully and felt proud of. She remembered it as the night he'd made everything about himself. After enough repetition, he began to doubt his own version of events. They had 2 children. Ethan, born 2013. Lily, born 2015. For a few years, the family looked fine from the outside. Daniel worked hard. Claire managed the home, the school schedules, the social calendar. She was the family's public face, and she was very good at it. But inside the house, something else was happening. Whenever Daniel raised a concern about finances, about parenting decisions, about anything, Claire had a ready response. He was too sensitive. He was negative. He didn't understand how much she sacrificed. He didn't appreciate what she carried alone. By the time any conversation ended, Daniel was the one apologizing. For concerns he'd raised, for feelings he'd expressed, for simply bringing things up. He remembers one evening in 2017. He had mentioned, carefully, that he felt like the 2 of them never talked anymore. Not really talked. Claire looked at him with what he later described as patient disappointment. She said she talked to him constantly. She said he never listened. She said maybe the problem wasn't that they didn't talk. Maybe the problem was that he wasn't present enough to notice when she did. He apologized. He wasn't sure what for. That's the thing about covert narcissism. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't leave bruises. It leaves a person standing in their own kitchen, apologizing for something they said clearly and meant kindly, no longer certain of what just happened. This is a pattern with a name. But Daniel didn't have the name yet. He just knew that by 2019, he was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with work. He had started to feel like a guest in his own life, someone who needed Claire's approval to know what he thought, what he remembered, what he was allowed to feel. The divorce filing came in January 2020. Claire initiated it. She had, in the months before, begun telling people close to her that Daniel had changed, that he had become withdrawn, unpredictable, difficult. By the time the paperwork was filed, the narrative was already built. She told her family that Daniel had become emotionally unavailable. She told the school community that the marriage had become unsafe. She told her therapist, and later the court, that she feared for her children's well-being when left alone with their father. But here's what she didn't count on. Daniel kept records. He had kept records for 2 years. The divorce proceedings began in February 2020, just weeks before the pandemic shut everything down. Court dates moved online. Mediation stalled. And Claire had something Daniel didn't realize she had: a plan. The first sign was the language. Ethan, who had always called his father Dad, started calling him Daniel. It happened gradually, first once, then regularly, then always. When Daniel asked about it, Ethan shrugged and said, "That's your name." Lily, who was 5 at the time, started flinching when Daniel raised his voice, even slightly, even to say something exciting. She would look toward her mother before responding to her father. Small hesitations, brief pauses, as if she needed permission before she was allowed to react. The second sign was the interference with visits. Claire had been granted temporary primary custody during the proceedings. Daniel had the children every other weekend, plus Wednesday evenings. Within 3 months, those visits were being disrupted roughly 1 time in 3, a doctor's appointment that couldn't be rescheduled. Ethan didn't feel well. Lily had a birthday party that, and Claire used these exact words, "I completely forgot to tell you about." Daniel documented each cancellation: date, time, reason given, his response. He had a spreadsheet. There was a Christmas visit that year, his first overnight with both kids since the proceedings began. He had planned it for weeks. He'd set up the guest room for Lily, bought Ethan the soccer cleats he'd asked for. Claire called at 4 in the afternoon on Christmas Eve to say Lily had a temperature. He asked what the temperature was. Claire said she hadn't checked yet, but could tell. He drove to the house anyway. Claire answered the door and said, with genuine seeming concern, that he really shouldn't expose himself given how much was going around. He could see Ethan standing in the hallway behind her, in his coat, holding his backpack. He did not see his children on Christmas Day 2020. He kept the spreadsheet. He kept every voicemail. He kept every text. He backed them up to a second drive. He didn't know yet what he was building. He just knew that in a situation designed to make him question his own perception, documentation was the only thing that felt solid. And here's what nobody tells you about that kind of record keeping. It's not just legal protection. It's sanity. It's proof that you are not imagining it. His attorney told him to keep going. The third sign was the vocabulary. One Sunday, Ethan came home and asked his father if it was true that angry people don't know they're angry. Daniel asked where he'd heard that. Ethan said his mom had been reading him a book about feelings and how they can be scary. He couldn't remember the title. That same month, Lily told her school counselor that her dad gets really big when he's upset. The counselor, following protocol, flagged the comment and notified Claire. Claire filed an amended motion within the week. But it gets worse. Ethan was in 3rd grade when his teacher noticed a change. He had been an outgoing kid, the one who answered questions, who laughed easily. Sometime in the fall of 2020, he became quiet. He stopped raising his hand. He told his teacher once that he didn't want to say the wrong thing. His teacher brought this up at a parent-teacher conference. Claire attended alone. She nodded with evident concern and said Ethan had been processing a lot of trauma at home. She thanked the teacher. She seemed like an attentive mother. She left. Daniel was not told the conference had taken place. He found out through the teacher's follow-up email, which was sent to both parents. He asked Claire directly. She said she had assumed he couldn't make it. He had been on his Wednesday evening visitation that day. With Ethan, his name was on the school contact forms. His number was in the system. Nobody had called him. By spring 2021, Daniel's attorney had built a clear picture. 41 documented visit disruptions over 14 months. 3 school events Daniel had not been notified of. 2 medical appointments he learned about after the fact. And 1 phone call, the one where his 9-year-old son called to say he was scared. That call was recorded, not by Daniel, by the family court's monitored communication service, which Claire herself had requested as a safety measure. She had set up the service, she had paid for the service, she had scheduled the call, and she had, the psychologist would later note, been standing in the same room when Ethan made it. Stay with me, because this is where the investigation begins. The court-appointed forensic psychologist was Dr. Patricia Okafor. She had a PhD from Vanderbilt, 17 years of family court experience, and a reputation for being thorough to the point of making attorneys uncomfortable. She interviewed both parents. She interviewed Ethan and Lily separately, 3 sessions each, over 4 months. She interviewed both sets of grandparents. She interviewed 4 teachers, the school counselor, Daniel's supervisor at work, and Claire's closest friend, who had, by this point, stopped being Claire's closest friend. She administered the MMPI-2 and the Millen Clinical Multiaxial Inventory to both parents. She ran a structured parenting evaluation. And then she focused on the children. Ethan's interviews were careful, not careful in the way a quiet child is careful, careful in a way a trained evaluator would recognize. His language about his father was too adult in specific places, too scripted. He used phrases like, "I feel unsafe," and "my feelings weren't respected." He was 9 years old. He hadn't developed that vocabulary on his own. But when Dr. Okafor shifted to neutral topics, soccer, video games, what he wanted to be when he grew up, something changed. He lit up. He talked about his dad coaching the team. He described a trip they'd taken to the Great Smoky Mountains in detail, from the cabin they'd stayed in down to what they'd eaten for breakfast. He remembered the name of the trail they hiked. He remembered the color of a bird his dad had looked up on his phone at the top. He didn't speak about his father the way a child speaks about someone who has hurt him. He spoke about him the way a child speaks about someone he misses, and is not allowed to say so. Lily was 6 when the evaluation began. She was more transparent than her brother, the way younger children often are. In her first session, she said she didn't like going to her daddy's house because "Mommy is sad when I leave." In her second session, she asked Dr. Okafor if she could tell her daddy something. Dr. Okafor said yes. Lily said, "I miss him." Then she looked at the door, as if checking whether someone was listening. The evaluation of Claire was where the picture became most significant. On the MMPI-2, Claire's profile showed elevated scores on scales associated with narcissistic traits, elevated self-presentation, low empathy markers, a pattern of externalizing blame. The scores did not reach a clinical diagnostic threshold, but they were notable. On the parenting evaluation, she described herself as Ethan and Lily's primary emotional anchor. She described Daniel as someone who struggled to connect emotionally. When asked to identify a positive parenting quality in him, she named one, then qualified it immediately with a concern. She could not name a second. When Dr. Okafor asked about the recorded phone call, the one where Ethan called to say he was scared, Claire said she had simply been nearby when Ethan made it. She hadn't prepared him for it. His feelings were his own. Dr. Okafor noted in her report that Claire answered this question without hesitation. No visible discomfort, no pause. The question was direct, the implication was clear, and Claire met it with the same composed certainty she brought to everything. This too was noted. Covert narcissists do not panic under questioning the way someone with a guilty conscience might. They have told the story so many times, to themselves, to others, to anyone who would listen, that it has become, in their own mind, true. Dr. Okafor noted, in the report, that the monitored communication service log showed Claire had sent Ethan a typed message 12 minutes before the call. The message read, "Remember what we talked about. Tell him how you really feel." But here's what they didn't know yet. The former friend, the one Claire had quietly cut off, had kept everything. Her name was Melissa. She and Claire had been close for 9 years, through school, through Claire's pregnancy with Lily, through the early stages of the divorce. At Claire's request, Melissa had provided a supporting declaration in the initial custody proceedings, describing Daniel as distant and emotionally checked out. She had believed what Claire told her. By the time Dr. Okafor reached her, Melissa had not spoken to Claire in months. The break came in October 2021. Melissa had been in Claire's kitchen. They were having coffee, the kind of ordinary Tuesday afternoon they'd shared dozens of times, when Claire's phone rang. It was the school counselor. Melissa could hear the call from across the kitchen. She heard the counselor mention Lily. She heard the words, expressed some concern, and her father. Claire thanked the counselor, said she'd follow up. Hung up. She turned to Melissa, and she smiled. Not a worried smile, not a relieved smile. "It's working," she said. Melissa said later she had stood there for a long moment, coffee cup in hand, trying to figure out what she'd just seen. She had known Claire for 9 years. She had believed everything Claire had told her about Daniel. She had signed that declaration. She had described him as distant and checked out because that was how Claire had described him, and she had no reason to doubt it. She had a reason now. She went home that afternoon and started taking screenshots, 87 text messages sent over 18 months. In them, Claire discussed the book she had been reading Ethan about big feelings. She discussed how she planned to request monitored calls. She laid out, in her own words, how she was coaching Ethan on what to say and how to say it. In one message, she wrote, "The goal is to make it feel like his choice. Kids believe what they think they decided themselves." Melissa gave those screenshots to Dr. Okafor, then she gave them to Daniel's attorney. And here's what gets me about this story. Melissa hadn't been looking for a reason to turn on Claire. She had believed her. She had vouched for her. She changed her mind because she was standing in the kitchen on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon and saw, for one unguarded moment, exactly who Claire actually was. The covert narcissist's greatest vulnerability is the mask. They wear it so long, so carefully, that they occasionally forget it's there. Dr. Patricia Okafor submitted her report on March 14, 2022. It was 84 pages long. The executive summary alone was 9 pages. She did not use the word alienation lightly. In 17 years of forensic evaluation, she had applied it in 11 prior cases. This was number 12. Her findings were direct. Claire had engaged in a sustained, methodical campaign to undermine the children's relationship with their father. The campaign had begun no later than mid-2020, within months of the divorce filing, and had escalated deliberately as each tactic produced results. The tactics documented: coaching Ethan to use fear-based language when describing his father, orchestrating the monitored phone call, selectively withholding school communications and medical updates, reading Ethan emotionally manipulative material designed to prime fear responses in relation to Daniel, using her own physical presence during children's expressions of distress to reinforce the association between contact with their father and anxiety. The children were not in danger from Daniel. His psychological assessments showed no concerning traits. His parenting capacity was rated as strong by every metric applied. Claire's assessments told a different story. Dr. Okafor wrote that Claire presented with a profile consistent with narcissistic personality disorder traits: grandiosity, diminished empathy, and a systematic pattern of exploiting the children's emotional dependency to serve her own narrative. The recommendation was clear: immediate restoration of Daniel's parenting time, a graduated transition to joint physical custody over 90 days, mandatory individual therapy for Claire, minimum 12 months, family therapy for all 4, with a court-approved therapist, specifically not one Claire had selected, a judicial review in 6 months with Dr. Okafor retained for ongoing evaluation. There was one more line in the report: not a recommendation, just an observation. Dr. Okafor wrote that in 17 years of forensic evaluation, she had rarely encountered a case where the alienating conduct was as methodical as it was here, combined with so little apparent awareness of harm. She wrote that Claire did not present as someone acting out of desperation or fear. She presented as someone executing a plan. The judge read the full report, all 84 pages. She did not schedule a follow-up hearing. She did not request further briefing. She issued her interim order the following morning. The emergency restriction on Daniel's contact with his children was lifted within 72 hours. The custody hearing was held in April 2022. Dr. Okafor testified for 2 hours. Melissa testified. The administrator from the monitored communication service testified about the log of Claire's message to Ethan sent 12 minutes before the call. Claire's attorney argued that Dr. Okafor's conclusions were speculative, that Melissa had an agenda, that the text messages were taken out of context. The judge found none of it persuasive. She awarded Daniel joint physical custody, effective immediately. She ordered Claire to begin court-monitored therapy within 30 days. She issued a formal finding, entered into the permanent court record, that Claire had engaged in conduct consistent with parental alienation and that this conduct had caused measurable emotional harm to both children. She did not terminate Claire's parental rights, but she made clear that any further interference with Daniel's relationship with his children would trigger an immediate custody modification hearing. Claire's attorney filed an appeal. It was denied. She filed a motion to have Dr. Okafor removed from the ongoing evaluation on grounds of bias. That too was denied. In June 2022, Daniel had his first unsupervised extended visit with Ethan and Lily in over 2 years. He took them to the Smoky Mountains, the same place Ethan had described in such detail during his evaluation. The trip with the cabin and the breakfast, and the things a 9-year-old remembers when he is not performing. Lily asked if they could come back every year. He said yes. It was not a clean ending. Transitions were hard. Ethan needed months of his own therapy to separate what he'd been told from what he actually felt. Lily had nightmares for a period. Rebuilding real trust, not the performance of it, but the actual thing, took longer than Daniel had hoped. But he kept showing up. Every scheduled exchange, every school event, every Saturday soccer practice. He did not demand that his children choose. He did not speak negatively about Claire in front of them. He simply remained present, consistent, and safe. His therapist had told him early on that the children would need to find their way back to him at their own pace, that any attempt to accelerate it, to compete with Claire's narrative, to correct what the kids believed, to push, would backfire. The goal was not to win. The goal was to be the kind of father they could return to when they were ready. Some weeks that felt impossible. He would drop Ethan off on a Sunday evening and watch his son walk through the door without looking back, and he would drive home and sit in the parking lot of a gas station for 20 minutes because he didn't trust himself to drive yet. He kept going anyway. And slowly, the children came back to him. By the end of 2022, Ethan had started calling him Dad again. Not dramatically. He didn't announce it. He didn't make it a moment. He just did it one day and kept doing it. One evening in December, Ethan was working through a problem set at the kitchen table, and he looked up and said, "Dad, can you help me with something?" Not Daniel. Dad. Daniel said yes. They sat down together, the two of them, working through a math problem about fractions and distances. It was not a breakthrough moment. Nobody cried. Nobody acknowledged what had happened over the past 2 years. It was just a Tuesday evening and a homework problem and a father and his son at a kitchen table. Completely ordinary, irreplaceable. He said later it was the best moment of his life. Not the court order, not the report, not the day the judge lifted the restriction, the Tuesday evening with the fractions. Let's step back, because this story isn't just about one family in Knoxville. It's about a specific type of harm that is deeply misunderstood by courts, by schools, and often by therapists who haven't specialized in it. Parental alienation is not a single event. There is no one conversation, no one moment where it begins, no document you can hold up and say, "Here, this is where it started." That invisibility is not a side effect. It is the mechanism. It is precisely how this kind of abuse works, and why it is so difficult to name until someone looks at the full picture. What Claire did, and what covert narcissists do in high-conflict custody situations, is exploit the fact that every individual action is explainable. A missed appointment, a book about feelings, a message before a phone call. None of those things, examined alone, rises to the level of a finding. Only the pattern does, and the pattern requires someone willing to look for it. There are warning signs that are worth knowing. When a child begins using adult therapeutic language they didn't have before, phrases like, "I feel unsafe," or "my feelings weren't respected," that vocabulary came from somewhere. Children do not generate that language on their own at age 9. When a child checks in with one parent before responding to the other, even in low-stakes moments, even when there's nothing at stake, that is not shyness. That is conditioning. That is a child who has learned that their responses are observed and judged. When a co-parent consistently fails to share school events, medical updates, and communications, while offering a plausible excuse for each individual instance, that is not disorganization. That is a pattern with intent. When a child has no memory of good times with the other parent, or remembers them only through the lens of something that went wrong, examine whether those memories have been selectively reinforced. Children don't forget entire years of warmth on their own. They forget what they've been trained not to mention. And when you notice these signs in yourself, when you find yourself wondering whether you're the problem, whether your concerns are valid, whether you're making too much of things, know that this doubt is also a symptom. It is what happens when someone has spent years making you question your own perception. The questioning itself is evidence. If you are living inside these dynamics, the most important thing you can do is document. Not just because documentation builds a legal case, though it may, but because documentation creates a record of reality in a situation deliberately designed to make you question what's real. And if you are carrying the weight of a relationship like the one Daniel survived, the years of quiet erosion, the systematic self-doubt, the exhaustion of being rewritten, that kind of psychological injury is real. It deserves real treatment. BetterHelp connects you with licensed therapists who specialize in narcissistic abuse recovery and co-parenting trauma. You don't have to work through this alone, and you don't have to wait until things get worse. The link is in the description. Daniel Mercer rebuilt his relationship with his children. It took years. It required professional help, for him, for Ethan, for Lily, for all three of them together. It required a forensic psychologist who was willing to look carefully enough and long enough to see what had been hidden. It also required something that can't be court-ordered and can't be evaluated on an MMPI-2. It required a father who kept showing up when showing up hurt, who held the door open when everything in him wanted to close it, who understood eventually that his children were not rejecting him. They were surviving the only way they'd been taught how. That understanding is hard-won. It does not come naturally. It comes from doing the work, the therapy, the reflection, the painful and unglamorous process of understanding what happened to you and what it cost the people you love. But it happened. His son calls him Dad. If this story resonated with you, if you've seen this pattern somewhere close to you, or if you've lived something like it, subscribe. Because next week we go into financial control, what it looks like when a partner systematically limits your economic independence, how it escalates quietly over years, and how people found their way out. You don't want to miss it.